The Paranormal Scholar invites you to sit down and listen to these true tales of the paranormal submitted to us by our subscribers and narrated in part by the horror narrator Mortis Media. I come from a small town in the heart of Serbia. The house I grew up in had belonged to my father for many years, and for most of my childhood had brought our family nothing but happy memories. However, about 4 years ago, things began to happen in that place that I just could not explain. One evening, I was outside taking pictures of my home. I was standing underneath our wooden gazebo, the garden to my side, facing the house. It wasn't until afterwards that I realized my camera had captured something strange. It was a glimmer of light hovering over the roof. If I had to describe it as anything, I would describe it as an orb. At first, I thought it was an anomaly with a camera flash. I had taken other photos from the same position, and nothing. A few of my friends said it was probably just dust, so I soon forgot about the photo. Last year, my sister and I made a special gift for our mum's birthday. It was a jar which we had decorated and filled with 50 notes saying why she was the best mum. Anyway, she loved it and placed it somewhere that she would always see it, on top of the TV in her bedroom. One day sometime afterwards, while my mum was ironing, she heard a loud and sudden bang. She turned and saw that the jar had moved. It was no longer on top of the TV. It was on the shelf directly beneath it. She was a bit spooked, but put the jar back and left the room. A couple of days passed before a similar incident occurred. She was walking through the room when it happened, only this time my mum saw it. She said that she saw the jar being pushed off the TV, do a flip, and then, almost like someone moved it mid-air, land perfectly on the shelf. She could not explain what she had seen. So, scared as she was, she refused to touch the jar. Later, I put the jar back on the TV and waited for it to happen again, but nothing did. To this day, my mum refuses to keep the jar on top of the TV. By now, I was seriously beginning to question what was happening in my house. It was then that my dad told me about something truly terrifying which had happened to him some 20 years before, when he was about 20 years old, before he married my mom. Every night when he lay down in his bed in that house, he would be haunted by 3 loud knocks. Just as he was drifting off to sleep, he would hear it. A single sharp knock, a pause, and then another 2 knocks. The knocks sounded as though they were coming from outside of the house, but there was never anything there. Yet each night when my dad was alone in bed, just before he fell asleep, these same 3 knocks would beat out against the wall. The inexplicable sounds continued for about a year, until the time came for my dad to go into the army. In my country, it is mandatory to spend a year in the army, if only for training in times of peace. When my dad came back home, whatever had been causing the knocking had gone, and the noises with it. My dad was never able to explain the source of those knocks. I cannot help but wonder whether that thing, whatever it was, truly ever left, or whether it remained in that house, and remains still to this day.
This happened to me when I was around 6 or 7. I am a twin, and my sister and I shared a room at the time. Our beds were pushed against adjacent walls, and their heads met at the corner. On the opposite corner was a closet. Between our beds and the closet, there was a huge amount of open floor space where we could play. We had a close family friend called Nana. She wasn't related to us by blood, but she was practically a grandmother to us, and we loved her dearly. She was an older woman who was very religious and one of the kindest people I've ever known. That night, I can't remember why, but Nana was staying overnight with us. We had set up an air mattress in my sister and I's room for her to use. My bed was parallel to the mattress, with the foot of the bed facing the closet. So Nana and I had the same view of the closet. Very late that night, I woke up for no particular reason. I remember knowing that it must have been late, because the TV was off downstairs. My parents often stayed up late watching it, so it must have been at least past midnight. Nana and my sister were both fast asleep, and I could hear my dad snoring in the other room. I was the only one awake. The first thing I noticed was the closet door. It was open. This was unusual, as we always closed it to stop our cat from going in there and messing with our things. The second thing that I noticed was that the interior was pitch black. It wasn't a normal kind of darkness. There was a street lamp right outside that room, which gave off enough excess light for you to be able to see inside the closet. But not today. It was total darkness, almost like the blackness itself was absorbing the light, absorbing it entirely. At the same time, there seemed to be a shape inside the closet. It's hard to describe what it was like, as it didn't seem to interact with the light like a normal object. However, I do remember that it took up the whole space of the closet, and that it looked sharp. In fact, I remember specifically thinking it looked like broken glass. But even that's not exactly the right way to describe this thing. Everything about this object, this thing, seemed wrong. Unplaceable, unnatural, and even sinister. Being a terrified child, I sat there for a long time unable to move. Then, very quietly, I woke up my Nana. She needed glasses, so I don't know how she could have seen this thing, because she seemed very calm. And when I told her what I saw, she asked me if I thought it was real or not. I honestly didn't know, and when I said as much, she told me to do the unthinkable. Go touch it. I could understand her thinking. She probably thought if I got close I could see that it was just a dress or a coat, and that I would no longer be afraid. But I just could not bring myself to do it. I was frozen. It felt as if hours had passed, and eventually I slid off my bed, Nana still laying down without her glasses on. The thing did not move as I got closer, and it didn't go away either. I was terrified of touching it, not only because of how dark and evil it felt, but also because I was certain that I would be cut to ribbons. It towered over me, as real as anything, and slowly, shaking, I stuck my hand into the closet. My hand went right through the thing, no change in temperature or in the way that the air felt, and no reaction from the creature itself. Petrified, I managed to whimper, "It's still there, Nana." I was holding back tears. I didn't see or hear her move to turn the lights back on, but the instant that they were on, I was standing in front of the empty closet. Nana looked just as scared as I did, and made me promise not to tell my sister, who was still sound asleep. I still don't know what that darkness was, but I never saw it again.
In Alberta, Canada, there is a place called the Royal TYRRELL Museum. It is a dinosaur museum named after a geologist who found the first dinosaur fossil in the area by chance in the late 1800s. Sometimes classes of school children would arrange to stay overnight to learn more about fossil records. In 2007, mine was one such class. It had just passed 5 PM, closing time for the museum, so we were allowed to roam the exhibits. Being a new junior high student, I had been entrusted with my very own cell phone. I roamed around the specimens recording a lot of footage. I found one of the aquatic exhibition rooms particularly interesting. It housed a colossal specimen, a 21-meter-long Shoniosaurus, a giant marine reptile that haunted northeastern British Columbia 220 million years ago. The museum regarded it as its crown jewel, and I could see why. Although incomplete, the fossil truly was giant. I finished my filming for the night and then thought nothing more of it. Months later, I thought back to my night at the museum and decided to review all that I had recorded. Eventually, I came to the footage of the Shoniosaurus. I was standing at the tail of the creature, surveying the room. On the video, I noticed something at the opposite end of the fossil, close to its jaws. It looked like a faint outline of a leg. It was spectral, ghostly, half not there. In the video, whilst I was standing still, I said to the friend I was with, "It looks cool, but so much is missing." At this point the foot moved to face me, then it turned and walked out of the room. For the next 5 to 10 minutes of video, I watched in horror as the foot followed me around the museum. As I walked filming the exhibits, I saw it turn corners ahead of me. Everywhere I went, the ghostly foot followed. It is said that the ghost of the geologist whom the museum was named after wanders the halls at night, making sure that the exhibits meet his standards. Had I invoked his displeasure after commenting on the incompleteness of one of the museum's prized specimens? Was it his ghost that I encountered that night? I cannot explain it. I wish I could share the footage with you. Unfortunately, it was lost after I dropped my phone in a glass of iced tea.
The story I'm about to relate to you happened 4 years ago. It was afternoon and I was home alone. From where I sat in my bed, I could see the brightness of the sun pour in through the window. And all of a sudden, my relaxation was interrupted by a faint whisper in my ear. It was that of a little girl, and I'll never forget what she said to me. As soft as her voice was, her words chilled me to the bone. I was terrified. Later that day, long after the sun had set and night rolled in, I heard someone running up and down the hallway right outside my bedroom door. But no one was there. The footsteps were light and made me think of the child's whisper from earlier that day. The events marked the beginning of a series of paranormal experiences which I cannot explain. A few weeks passed without incident. Then once again I was sitting home alone in my bed and my eyelids felt heavy. So I closed them, just for a second. And you know when you close your eyes you can see things without actually seeing? Well, in that moment between the blackness and the light, I saw a little girl. She was standing just a few feet away from me, in the corner of the room. She was young, short, and wore a red dress which was embroidered with a leaf pattern. Her skin was extremely pale, almost translucent, Her hair, parted down the middle, was long and black. I only saw her for that split second, but the image of her imprinted itself into my mind. For several months afterwards, I would see this girl in my dreams each night. The sight of her haunted me, following me from dream to dream. During this time, objects would mysteriously disappear, only to reappear in a different place. All the time, I felt as though this child wanted something from me, yet I did not know how to help her. Then one night, the girl visited me no more. She was gone from my dreams and my house, and so the spectral girl exited my life as mysteriously as she had entered it. In the aftermath of my experience, I tried using a Ouija board in an attempt to contact the spirit child. It provided no answer. Since that time, I have not heard or seen the girl again. I will never know what she wanted from me, or whether or not her spirit found peace.
About a year ago, my sister and her boyfriend moved into a new house in the south of Wales. After the terrible things that happened in that place, I looked into the history of the building. There was no known ominous past. It was clean, ordinary, which makes the events that I'm about to describe all the more horrifying. For a while after they moved in, all was quiet. Admittedly, the property did feel strange in itself, but we all dismissed that. That was until the occurrences began to happen. It initially began when my sister claimed her deceased boyfriend was near. Her previous boyfriend had died in early 2013. The loss had affected both of our families heavily, especially my sister. When she said that she felt his presence, she told us that his spirit was there to protect her from the darkness that lurked in that house. It was after that things got bad. My sister told me that one day upon entering the house, that it was like someone or something was in the doorway preventing her from getting past, almost like she was not wanted in that place. She and her boyfriend began seeing scratch marks and bloodstains on the walls, only for them to disappear mysteriously by themselves after a few days. On one occasion, my sister even found a wrench covered in blood, but that too turned up clean a few days later. They could not explain what was happening. By this point, both her and her boyfriend were very afraid. One evening I was ushered down with my mother and stepfather because the police had been called to the house. When we got there, we were told that my sister's friend had seen a body in the attic. It had been rolled up inside of a mattress. Yet, when the police arrived, there was no body and no mattress. My sister was in hysterics, wildly throwing around accusations of murder, screeching that it could have been her own dead body wrapped up in that mattress. She was terrified for her life. After her outburst, the police questioned my sister's mental state. She underwent a mental examination the following week, which found her to be perfectly healthy. Besides, she had not been the only one to see and experience these things in that house. It was like whatever dwelled there was tormenting her. They moved out not long afterwards. We found out from a friend of hers that since then, no one has stayed in that house for more than a few months. In the months that followed, I began to wonder whether or not my sister truly felt her late boyfriend's spirit there, or whether that dark entity had pretended to be him, so that she would open herself up and in doing so become more vulnerable, Recently, a planchette from a Ouija board was left on the doorstep of her new house. My sister never used a board and didn't even know what the planchette was until my grandmother told her. She discarded of the thing immediately. Where it came from or how it got there is unknown. I doubt you will get the chance to read this, but if you do and decide to use this in a video, please do not use my name. I won't bore you with all the small experiences I have had since I was a small child, both angelic and demonic, but I will share something that, to this day, still haunts me. It was the day that I learnt curiosity does indeed kill the cat. I've always had a slight interest in the paranormal, ever since I had my first few inexplicable experiences, from dark entities calling my name, to hearing deep, cold breaths, to even a gentle humming from a voice which I can only describe as beautiful as Mother Mary herself. But I guess you could say that I started getting more interested when I was about 13 years old. I loved watching series about demons and ghosts on TV, especially A Haunting when they used to show it on the Discovery Channel. I enjoyed the thrill of being scared from it. Call me odd, but I liked it when my imagination would scare me at night after watching these shows. Anyway, as I became more and more interested in the paranormal, I began watching a lot of shows on demons. It was then that I encountered demonology for the first time. My curiosity was piqued. After this, I started researching on my own, especially about exorcisms and demonic possession. First, it was just small Wikipedia glances, but as time went on, it grew into hours of research. Within a year, I was researching this stuff for around 3 hours on weekdays, what with school and all that. And on weekends, I would spend up to 6 hours dedicated to my research. By the end of it, I knew more about the rites of exorcism than was healthy for any teenager to know. However, my interest was far from sated. The more I read, the more I wanted to read. What had started as curiosity had slowly morphed into an obsession. I was being seduced by the knowledge of something which was way beyond my comprehension. It started going bad for me when I delved deeper into demonology, specifically the names of demons. It was the names of certain demons that enticed me the most, mainly those within archdemonic reigns, names of pure evil which I dare not say even here. During those times, I noticed strange things starting to happen. I started getting less peaceful sleep, my mind clogged with horrific thoughts and utterly violent images that weren't my own. It is a difficult feeling to describe, feeling so completely drained of energy, my mind numbed, yet preoccupied. After more time passed, the intensity of my experiences increased. Things within my room would move of their own accord. I would hear odd sounds that nobody else did. But most terrifying of all, I felt as though a great darkness followed me. The feeling of being watched was constant, even as I slept. And I was not imagining this. I knew that something was watching me. However, this only added to my curiosity. So I started researching how to contact demonic entities. You know how they say that you should never mention the name of a demon out loud because it will grant them entrance into your life. Well, I broke that rule. Too many times. I just wanted to see what they really looked like, instead of them lurking in the shadows. I tried contacting them, saying their names out loud, inviting them into my life. Even at that time, I knew that this was going too far, that I was playing with fire. But, oddly, I still wanted more. For 3 years this went on. By now, the feeling of being watched had intensified to the point that not a moment passed where I was truly alone. An ever-present darkness haunted each and every action. In hindsight, I believe they were just waiting. Not in the style of, "you are not ready yet," but more like that of an apex predator ready to make their kill. They can see you, but you cannot see them, yet you feel them watching you and waiting. They wanted to catch me when I was off guard. The first time I actually saw one of these entities was, surprisingly enough, inside of a chapel. It was in shadow form, but as strange as it may be to hear, I knew it was a demonic entity. For those of you who have never encountered such a being, it is difficult for me to explain. The best way of describing it is that you just know. Every single cell in your body just knows, and you know that you cannot deny it. I was being hunted. Even after I stopped researching, they remained. I had opened the door and invited them into my life, and that, I learnt, is a one-way door. Because of this, I constantly felt dread. Yet, I also felt utter hate as dark thoughts uncontrollably oppressed my mind. It was like they were trying to separate me from who I was. I wanted it to stop, I wanted to quit, but it was as if these beings kept forcing me to suffer because I was responsible for what I was going through, and I knew it was true. Never did I actually speak to one of these things, and for that I am endlessly grateful. Eventually, with time, their grip on me began to slacken. I met a nice girl and I established a friendship with an ordained exorcist in my diocese. Between the two of them, the darkness began to lift. I was able to smile again and feel happy. 10 years have passed since that time, and the curiosity has not returned, nor has the oppressive presence that once plagued me. Yet, even to this day, odd things do occasionally still happen. There are still times when I can feel eyes watching me. It is rare, and when it happens they feel distant, but those demonic eyes remain all the same, watching me, waiting for something to happen. Although I cut my binds to those demons, they do not accept it as true to an agreement once made when I was naive. I do know one thing though for sure. Never again will I try to dabble with something that possesses powers beyond any comprehension the human mind is capable of. If anything, now I use what I know as a warning. There really are some things that are not meant for us mortals to understand, no matter how much information there is about it. Ultimately, the unknown is best left as the name states, unknown. When I was about 10 years of age, my brother and I lived with our great-grandparents in a house in the country. My mother rarely visited us, so each time she did we were pleased to see her. However, her trip was coming to an end, and she had just let us know that she would be leaving without us again. I was very depressed. I was sitting on the edge of the queen-size bed in the master bedroom of the house when I heard a voice. "Hello? Is there anyone there?" Thinking that it was a visitor of my mother's in the living room, I answered, "Yes, I'm in this room." The voice said, "Can you help me? Can you come in front of me?" I said sure, stood up and began to walk to the door that connected the bedroom with the living room. To get there, I had to pass by my grandmother's dresser. It was old and had a large dressing mirror on top of it. As I passed by, I caught sight of something in the corner of my eye. There was a woman in the mirror, looking at me. Admittedly, I had been sick lately, just having recovered from the measles, so I wasn't sure if this was a delusion. I asked, "Am I imagining you?" I instantly felt uneasy. The apparition had a presence of evil about her, which made me sit down on the end of the bed so that I wouldn't fall down. I summoned up my courage, soothed by my faith in Jesus. Since I was a church-going Christian, I knew that he would protect me from the devil and his works. I glanced up at her again. Her hair was fashioned in such a way that did not belong to this time. If I had to guess, I would place her in the 18th century. Everything was surreal. The woman in the mirror asked me if I believed in ghosts. Cautious in my response to this strange figure, I told her that I had never met one, but had read about them. Then, slightly fearful and lingering over my words, I asked her if that was what she was. She responded by saying that she was looking for a way to move on, as she had died nearby and was lost. Again she asked me, "Can you help me?" I don't remember the entire conversation. However, after all these years, her final statement has stayed with me. She said that she was going to kill me. She had no choice, she said, as people who met ghosts weren't allowed to live to tell the tale. Panicking, I remember jumbling together a sad story about my life, that I was miserable and neglected by my mother, that I had no friends and that no one liked me. Parts of it were true, parts of it were not. I hoped that my plight would make her feel sympathy and that she might spare me. I told her that she was the only person who had talked to me in a long time, that I would like to help her and be her friend. She did not respond right away. Eventually she told me that she was going to have to leave now, but would return again to talk with me some other time. It was then that my mother came into the bedroom. She shooed me out as she wanted to take a nap. I was in the living room when I heard a horrifying scream. My mother came running out of the room, visibly shaken. My great-grandmother asked her what was wrong. My mother answered, "There was a woman in the mirror." We all went into the bedroom together and looked at the mirror. There was no one there, but I knew who my mother had seen. My mother refused to sleep in the bedroom after that, and so took my bed. Since I had lied and told her that I hadn't seen anything, she said that I could sleep in the main bedroom. A queen-sized bed, I thought, not really a punishment. Besides, I had already made a plan. I had originally spoke with my minister on the phone about the woman in the mirror, but he told me that such things were just nonsense, and said it was probably because of the kind of books I was reading. I knew that I would have to deal with this myself. I spoke with the ghostly woman 2 more times, giving her sob stories and mock despair each time. When the weekend came, I finally found the time to ride my bicycle down to the local church. I filled a bottle with holy water. I took the water home and went to the mirror where I splashed it in the shape of a cross. After that, I never saw her again. Recently, I read a book titled "Deliver Us from Evil," written by a New York police sergeant and an exorcist. In the book, they documented a case of a demonic entity appearing as a woman in the mirror of a family that they were helping. It left me wondering if they had met the same apparition I had. About a month ago, I moved into a moderately sized apartment with the love of my life, Thomas, and his preschool-aged stepdaughter, Daisy. The move came as a huge relief to the both of us. We were thrilled to finally be living together. Daisy was also ecstatic to now have her own big girl room where she could play and enjoy her own space. Moving can certainly be a stressful experience, having to uproot every single belonging and haul everything multiple times, only to then settle yourself in an unfamiliar space. So naturally, when things turned up in places other than where I had left them, I was quick to dismiss it as the chaos of the move. I also attributed crankiness, short tempers, and the general feeling of uneasiness to being in our new environment. Even after what happened during our first night there. I had been asleep for several hours when, around 4:30 in the morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of a woman gasping. It startled me so much that I instantly sat upright, flinging the covers from myself as I wildly scanned the room. I surveyed my surroundings: bed, dresser, and lots of boxes. Eventually my eyes adjusted to the darkness and I was able to see Thomas lying next to me in bed. The moment I focused on his sleeping form, he rolled over, lifted his head, and looked at me. Only his eyes were firmly closed. Regardless, the intensity of his eyeless stare burned into me as his face formed an expression of humor and snideness. The expression terrified me. Against every shaken fiber of my being, I laid back down in an attempt to lull him out of whatever dream he was in. At that point, his head snapped to the side, our noses almost touching. He wiggled his eyebrows, as if he was going to try to make a joke. Chillingly, still seemingly asleep, he let out a little laugh and uttered, "How scared are you right now?" After that, like a spell had been broken, he fell back into rest. I couldn't blink or breathe or even cry. It was all so startling, and on top of that, I was completely exhausted. At some point between 5 and 6, I finally fell asleep. The next day, thinking about what had happened the night before, everything seemed surreal. It couldn't possibly have happened. I decided to attribute the whole ordeal to a waking dream. We had so much to do, and I didn't have time to dwell on it. We quickly got the apartment settled over the weekend. As Daisy would be returning from a sleepover on Sunday evening, I wanted everything to be perfect for her when she arrived. So I did the grocery shopping, decorated her room into something very aesthetically pleasing for a 4-year-old, and busied myself with fine-tuning her new home. Her first night there was a rousing success. She fell in love with the place just as her father and I had. That, I am comfortable to say, was the biggest sigh of relief of all. We had officially done it. The chaos of the move was through, and we could resume our normality: work, school, meals, and the like. The next week was largely uneventful, with the occasional instance of, "How did this box end up in here?" and "Who left that light on?" Menial things that nobody ever pays much attention to. I didn't anyway, but I certainly do now. The next weekend we hosted a party so that my family could see our new home. The apartment was a big hit with everybody, with the exception of my grandmother. She had walked around the house with a skeptical eye, occasionally glancing over her shoulder and checking in cupboards and behind doors. Although she is a very interesting lady, my grandmother is also very eccentric, so I didn't pay much attention to her suspicious glances. However, when we all finally sat down for dinner, throughout the entire meal my attention was pulled away time and time again by my grandmother. She sat at the end of the table, silently, gazing with great intention at our sliding patio door. After watching her do this for several minutes, I finally asked her what was so interesting in our garden. She acted like I had startled her out of some kind of trance. Looking at me, she said, "I keep seeing your white cat in the reflection. You didn't tell me you bought a new cat." We hadn't. I leered over the table into the living room. Nothing. No cat. She quickly dismissed the comments as a product of a senior moment, and our happy evening resumed. But the white cat stuck in my memory. Later that evening, after I had cleaned up the post-party mess, I began building a fire in our living room fireplace. The 3 of us were due to relax, when, out of the corner of my eye, it was there. The white cat. It was big and as fast as a shot, darting under my table and away to the patio door. I nearly fell over trying to stand and give chase to the stowaway animal. But when I ran over to where he had gone, there was no sign of any animal. Afterwards, when we had settled in for our movie, I told Thomas that I too had seen the white cat, and that it had disappeared. Being skeptical of anything paranormal, he shrugged it off with a rational explanation, suggesting that I should not dwell on a supposed phantom cat. Relaxing, I agreed. We both chuckled at the concept and said that a ghost cat wouldn't be such a terrible inconvenience in our home anyway, when suddenly Thomas leapt up off the couch. He scolded me, saying that there was no cat and that there was no reason for me to be going to such lengths to scare him. I was confused, to say the least. I know that you believe in this stuff, but I don't. You don't need to brush stuff against my leg and try to get a rise out of me. But I had never touched him. Besides, I was sitting at least 3 feet away, with Daisy between us. Realizing that I couldn't have touched him, confusion washed over Thomas's face. He quietly apologized and sat back down. The expression of shock and wondering stayed on his face for a little while. When the movie was over and everyone was in bed, I had trouble finding sleep. I faded in and out of dreams of the white cat, and dreams of a woman that looked very much like myself. The dreams were bizarre, to say the least. The woman who looked like me would laugh and howl, then scrape dirt up off the ground and stuff it into her face. Each time that she did, I would choke and spit and gasp for air. But not her. She would just howl and laugh and scoop up another handful of dirt. Needless to say, I did not sleep well. The next morning, Thomas was on shift to get Daisy out of bed. As he did, I dozed, sleepily listening to them moving about the house. I had faded back into a light sleep when I was awoken by hurried footsteps coming up the hall. Thomas grabbed my shoulder and shook it gently, asking, "How did you do that? How did you?" I was confused and tired. Sitting up, I asked him to explain what had happened. This is what he told me. He had been helping Daisy pull her pajamas down so that she could use the bathroom when she had pointed out the door and said, "There goes Lovey. Good morning, Lovey." Lovey was a pet name that she's always had for me. When Thomas looked out the door and saw nothing, he had replied, "Where's Lovey? She isn't there." Yet Daisy had pointed her finger out the door and insisted, "Yes, Daddy, she's right there." It was then that Thomas saw me, walking through the living room into the kitchen. Messy hair, sweatpants, sleepy shuffle. Whatever this thing was, it was a carbon copy of me. Thomas went on to explain that he and Daisy had gone into the living room to follow me. "Lovey's hiding in the kitchen," Thomas had said. "She's gonna pop out and scare us." Thinking it was a game, Daisy had took off back to her room. Thomas had snuck around the kitchen threshold, as this was the only place where someone could conceal themselves from sight. Yet, when he looked inside, I had not been there. Only it hadn't been me in the first place, as I had been dozing in bed the entire time. It took about 10 minutes of me swearing up and down that I had been in bed the whole time before Thomas realized that I was telling the truth. I hadn't teleported out of there. I was never there to begin with. Whatever he and Daisy saw wasn't me. I instantly thought of the dreams that had plagued me that night, of the woman who looked just like me, the howling woman. Just thinking about this made my stomach sink. After this, I thought that there was something wrong with our apartment. Yet, within just a few days, I knew I was proven wrong. Whatever was happening wasn't confined to the apartment anymore. As I sat at my desk late one afternoon, wrapping up the day's activities, I heard the front door to the office open and my managers hurry inside. This wasn't at all odd for me. Midwestern November weather is, if nothing else, windy and unpleasant. Yet, when they stepped into the area in front of my cubicle, I knew something was wrong. When I saw the expression on their faces, I was taken back to Thomas's face the previous weekend. Confusion and fear. They both started to speak to me all at once, loud and agitated. I was starting to worry. What had happened? Did they see a car accident on their smoke break? Was somebody hurt? Finally, one of my managers, Kelly, was able to articulate her thoughts. "Where did you come in? What are you doing?" She was not asking, she was demanding, shock painted across her face. When my answers did not satisfy her, I hadn't been outside for hours, her demeanor changed from confusion to anger. "Do not lie to me. You're not funny. How the hell did you get in here so quickly?" At that moment, the cold, sinking feeling from the weekend before returned to my stomach. I hadn't been outside. After a coworker verified this, my managers finally stopped shouting at me. The realization hit that there was no joke or lie being played out. My other manager, Mary, explained that she and Kelly had seen me absent-mindedly pacing through the parking lot outside. I was faced away from them, with my hands folded up in a praying position under my chin. This was a particular quirk of mine. I'll often weave my fingers together and rest my chin on my hands. It was something I've always done. Yet once again, whatever they saw outside wasn't me. Kelly and Mary continued to provide precise details of this thing outside. Not only did it mimic my hand movements, but it also walked like me, copying my absent-minded habit of stretching my legs by rolling from my heel to my toe to come up on top of my tiptoes. It was even dressed in the same hiking boots, leggings, and college basketball sweater that I was wearing. Every detail matched perfectly, except for one. Throughout this whole conversation, Kelly kept returning to the same thing, the reason why she thought I had been trying to scare them. As this thing paced the parking lot, mimicking me in every way, it made noises like a cat. As the reality set in that whatever had been outside wasn't actually me, nobody knew how to react. There was no panic. Instead, two very calmly voiced questions hung in the air. First, if it wasn't me, then what was it? And secondly, is it still out there? I poked my head out the door and scanned the parking lot before slowly walking outside into the bitter wind. As I approached my car, I prayed that this thing was long gone. I couldn't begin to imagine running into it, mirroring my image, dressed up as me. When I was safely inside of my car, my phone rang. It was Thomas. He had arrived at the apartment about 10 minutes beforehand, and as he explained to me, every ceiling light that he had tried to turn on had popped a light bulb, 3 in total. When he had returned to the kitchen for new bulbs, he had suddenly heard sprinting feet approach him. Not hurried steps or even a hustle, but the loud steps of someone charging you with a purpose. His military training took over, and at the prospect of having a violent intruder in the house, he grabbed a ceramic knife from the counter. Yet, when he had ducked and turned to face the assailant, there was nobody there. There was nobody in the kitchen. There was nobody in the apartment. In fact, there was not even anybody in the complex hall or out the main door. After I told him about the happenings at work, the only response he could muster was, "Let's get out of the house tonight. Let's go see our parents or your grandma. Let's get out of the house." That was an idea I got behind. When I arrived home, he met me at the garden gate with a collection of belongings. I never set foot inside. We thought that being at someone else's home would give us a small reprieve. However, that thought was short-lived. At Thomas's mother's house, a closet door opened and then shut, seemingly of its own volition. Also, a foul smell seeped into the house, almost as soon as we set foot through the door. I've seen enough horror movies to draw conclusions from these events. we decided that we ought not stay for too long. Thomas's mother shared in our confusion and fear. Ultimately unable to help, she hugged us goodbye. As we drove away, I looked on as every window of her house lit up, as every source of light in the building was switched on. Grandmother's house wasn't much better. As we walked in her door, yet another light bulb exploded, not 2 feet from Thomas's head. We both rushed inside, thinking that we could leave the presents out on the porch if we closed the door quickly enough. Having seen the white cat at our housewarming party, my grandmother was concerned. She placed her hands on my shoulder and told me that I needed to cleanse the house. She gave us a couple of white candles and instructed us both to leave our Bibles open where the bulk of the activity was happening. Yet, as much as I clung to those white candles, they did nothing to relieve the situation. Neither did the advice from an old friend of mine who has experience with spirit communications. Strange things still happen in my house, and I am still haunted by my doppelganger. This thing seems to take delight in following us everywhere, and scaring not only us, but everyone we come into contact with. I do not know what it is. I can only describe it as some sort of dark presence. Its intentions are far from pleasant. It terrifies me, and I feel unwelcome in my own home, like I am being forced out. Whatever is in my apartment doesn't plan on leaving anytime soon. While I have always been fascinated by the paranormal, nothing paranormal ever really happened to me until I turned 14. In the spring of that year, I lived in a small town in Tennessee in America. One morning, I had a terrible nightmare. In the nightmare, my mother, father, and my father's brother went to a department store. The parking lot was empty, and it was over a river. I couldn't see it, but I knew that it was there because the parking lot was very thin. I was afraid of the river because I cannot swim. At the bank, near the parking lot, there was a bush with a tree growing out of it. For some reason, the strange bush tree stuck out in my mind. In the department store, we couldn't find what we were looking for. When we left the store and got into the car, I remember feeling panic. My mother was driving, and she drove forward instead of backward. We went into the river. I dreamt that the car was filling up with water. I was terrified. I knew that I was going to drown. All the while my dad kept yelling, "Don't worry, we're going to be okay." He lowered the windows so he and my mother were able to exit the car. My uncle and I were in the back seat. We did the same. I remember the water was very muddy. I could just about see the light through the water as I swam towards the surface. I was almost there when, suddenly, something grabbed my right foot. I looked down. It was my uncle. He was pulling me down, deeper into the water. With that, I screamed and woke up. That whole week I was very upset by the dream. It had been more real than any dream I had ever had before. I told my teachers and friends about the dream. I was that terrified. I had the dream on the Monday. By Friday, I was feeling better. In fact, I had almost forgotten about it at that point. After school that day, I went to my neighbor's house and was talking with them when my mom came and got me. She looked panicked. It was then that she told me that there had been an emergency. My uncle, a different uncle from the dream, was missing. My Uncle Jimmy, his son, and his son's friend had gone fishing together. My uncle had been in his boat, whilst my cousin and his friend were using my cousin's boat. Sometime during the trip, the second boat lost sight of the first. Eventually they found my Uncle Jimmy's boat. However, he himself was nowhere to be seen. Fearing the worst, the sheriff organized a team of divers and dragged the river. During that week, I didn't go to school. At this point, we didn't have any hope of finding him alive. My mum and I stayed at my aunt's house while my dad went to the river to help them search the woods. On the Sunday, my mum and I went to the river to help with the searching ourselves. It was the first time I had ever been there. There was a gravel road that sloped down to the riverbank, and I refused to be in the car when my mum parked it. She let me out and I walked down the hill. There were a lot of people gathered, with porta potties and tables of food laid out for all those involved in the search. My mum and I decided to sit by the river on a large rock, and that's when I saw it. By the riverbank, there was a bush with a tree growing out of it. The same one from my dream. I immediately began to freak out. I told my mom about the tree and began spluttering about my dream, trying to refresh her memory of what I had told her only a few days before. I felt like she wasn't listening to me. She wanted me to calm down. She thought that I was making a scene and being disrespectful of the situation. So, for now, I held my tongue. Later that day, my dad and I had to use the restroom. We didn't want to use the porta potties because people were gathered near them and getting food from the tables. So we walked up the hill by the river. At the top of the hill, there was a thin slab of concrete on the ground with a metal rod sticking out of it. All of a sudden, I felt sick. That awful sinking feeling that you feel when you've been caught doing something you shouldn't be washed over me. I stood on the concrete. To my left, there was a cliff over the river. The tree branches were thin, and I told my dad, "They're going to find him soon." I pointed to the clearing in the river. "Right there. When they find him, they'll find his right shoe." My dad came over and hit my hand. He said not to tell anyone what I had just told him, and that I should be ashamed. The next day, divers found my uncle's right shoe. My dad had told them to check the spot I had pointed to. When they found my uncle's body, he was wearing a cotton overall. It was believed that when it filled up with water, he had lacked the strength to swim to the surface. After this happened, I became convinced that I had some sort of gift. I had known where they would find my uncle and had dreamt of the river that would claim his life. I had seen the future and would continue to do so from then on. I can predict the future. To be more explicit, I don't remember dreams more than maybe a dozen times a month, but when I do remember them, they often foreshadow an event that is yet to happen. Sometimes the event comes to pass the following day. Sometimes it can take more time, the record so far being 4 years. Mostly, my insights are limited to boring stuff. I've seen lots of news headlines before they show up. People turning up late to work. What I'll be eating on a future day. Occasionally, I do see more. When I was in school, I used my ability to cheat on tests. Another time, I saw a car crash before it happened and avoided getting a broken arm. I predicted the death of every pet I've ever owned, months in advance with an exact date. At one point, I was even able to piece together the events of 2 days straight. I also dreamt of the riots in California after Trump was elected before they happened. Although, in the version I saw, the military was involved, so I'm under the impression it might be an event yet to come. When I was a child, I was obsessed with the idea of lucid dreaming. Eventually, I trained my brain so well that almost all of my dreams were lucid. I used this omnipotency to create what I came to call the Enigma machine. Basically, my childhood method for creating simulations of anything I wanted. I created situations I was curious about in order to see how well they played out, so I was better prepared for them. However, as time passed, I realized that all of these simulations were flawed. They were taking place in a world where everything happened exactly as I wanted them to. No physics, no chemistry or general laws of the universe. Instead, everything was governed by my biases. So, I stopped using my Enigma machine. It was then that I first experienced true foresight. The first thing I ever saw with it was a headline about a barn full of fertilizer burning down. Nowadays, aside from my foresight, I rarely dream at all. If I do not see a future event, it is just a great blackness until I wake up. Part of me wonders if my foresight was triggered by my childhood lucid dreaming. Did I learn how to access a part of my brain which would have otherwise been off limits? I do not know. I know that there are a lot of people who think I'm just assigning dreams to events. Believe me when I say I've seen a few psychologists who all diagnose me as being slightly off my rocker, or just brushed me off as an angsty teen trying to assign meaning to life. However, they can't understand the fight I've had with myself trying to debunk it all as bogus. I am a strong believer in everything having an explanation, but I just cannot find one here. All I know is that sometimes I dream things which go on to happen exactly as I saw them until I interfere. About 3 years ago, I experienced 2 premonitions. Both told of horrendous tragedies and came to me in the form of dreams. Initially, I shook them off as nightmares. However, this immediately evaporated once I had discovered that the events in my dreams came to pass. It was March 2014. I dreamt that I was on a plane. When the craft took off, it was nighttime. From where I sat in a window seat, I could see that the plane was a wide-body aeroplane. I didn't know where we were heading. As everyone settled down into the flight, I watched as the cabin crew began to serve meals and drinks. Suddenly, the plane turned violently. Immediately, there were screams of panic on board. The plane started to roll 360 degrees before plunging down at an incredible speed. We were falling out of the sky. As the aircraft plunged, it broke up. Even now, I can clearly remember the sensation of still being strapped to my seat as I crashed onto an island. All around me, pieces of debris fell from the sky, colliding with the beach and dropping into the sea. Above me was the sun, already in the middle of the sky when the plane crashed. I woke up. It was 8:19 a.m. and I struggled to shake the nightmarish contents of my dream. I jokingly thought, what if a plane had actually crashed? After that, I went to prepare for my day. It was a weekend. I went to my computer and opened Facebook. It was then that I saw it. The very first thing on my newsfeed, Malaysia Airlines has lost contact with flight MH370. The following year, debris from the craft was discovered on a beach on Reunion, an island in the Western Indian Ocean. However, my premonition did not end there. Around the end of April, I dreamt about another plane crash. This time, I was on the ground. Overhead, I watched as an aeroplane nosedived into the earth, crashed, and then exploded in a ball of flames. A news headline screamed, "Malaysia Airlines crash, 295 killed." After this second dream, I could not shake the feeling that a great tragedy would yet again befall Malaysia Airlines. Over the following weeks, the airline was struck by problems, including an emergency landing and malfunctions with the aircraft. However, deep down, I knew that these problems were not the only ones the airline would face. From my dreams, I knew that a Malaysia Airlines aeroplane was going to crash again. On the 17th of July 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over the Ukraine, killing 298 people. I now believe that I have the gift to foresee tragic events in my dreams. and it haunts me to this day. This story takes place over the span of about 5 years, beginning back in 1999 during my second year of middle school and ending near my 18th birthday. Before I begin, I'd like to apologize for the length of this story, as it really means a lot to me, and I feel that I need to spend some time explaining all of the details. Now, I've never been one to believe in ghosts and spirits and all that. Even now, I find it very hard to place my trust in the supposed paranormal encounters that I hear from time to time. However, these events that I'm about to share changed my life forever, and I will never think about life and death the same way again. The story starts when I was 12 years old and attending 7th grade in Black Forest, Colorado. I didn't have many friends at the time because I was new to the area and I was also a bit shy. I honestly can't recall who I was friends with back then. However, I remember very clearly the day that I met her. She was a tall blonde girl who always had this sad and confused look in her eyes. Her name was Allie. I had seen her around the school before, and I knew that there was something a little off about her, like she had some kind of mental disability or something. Whenever I saw her, she was always sitting somewhere by herself while drawing in her notebook. People used to make fun of her every now and then because she was so quiet, like she literally never spoke a word to anyone, ever. I actually thought that she might have been mute. It wasn't until about halfway through the second semester when I finally met her. I noticed her standing near the school entrance, clutching her notebooks tightly to her chest and looking as though she was about to cry. A few kids were holding up a picture that she had drawn, waving it around in the air while taunting her, with nothing better to do than humiliate this poor girl. I decided to intervene because I was so disgusted with how cruel those kids were being to her. I quickly walked up from behind and snatched the drawing with one hand while grabbing Allie's hand and pulling her away with the other. I gave little concern to the bullies, cursing me from behind, and we kept walking hand in hand for a few seconds before I pulled her aside and handed her the drawing. "You really need to stand up for yourself," I said. "Next time you should just walk away from them. Like seriously, don't even pay attention to those jerks, okay?" She didn't seem to acknowledge any of my words. Her eyes were fixed on her crumpled up drawing. "I can walk you home if you like." Allie pursed her lips for a moment before she finally shifted her gaze towards me. We looked at each other for a few seconds, and then she smiled softly and nodded her head. I tried to make small talk with her on the way over to her house, but she only ever made subtle facial expressions and nodded her head in response. It was a bit awkward, to be honest, but I felt really bad for her, and I just wanted someone to treat her like a human being for once. I don't think she realized how pretty she was, and I kept wondering about what could have led her to have such a poor self-image. After about 20 minutes or so, we both arrived in front of her house. Immediately, I got a very creepy vibe from the place. I could tell that Allie didn't like the house either, as she seemed slightly hesitant to open the rusted black gate that separated the overgrown yard from the sidewalk. She carefully walked up to the front door and stalled for a bit before walking inside. Then she turned around and waved at me as she closed the door behind her. I really didn't want to hang around near that house any longer, so I continued to jog down the road to my house a little faster than usual. The next day, I sat alone on the bleachers after school and watched the soccer team practice for a while. Half an hour or so had passed since I sat down when I thought I heard footsteps coming from behind me, so I turned around to see who else had nothing better to do than watch the junior high soccer team practice. To my surprise, it was Allie. She smiled at me when she saw that I noticed her, and she continued to walk down the aisle towards where I was sitting. She sat down next to me and then looked out at the field. "I've always enjoyed watching sports, although I never seem to understand them," she said softly. Obviously, I was a bit bewildered when she said this. Here I had thought that she wasn't able to speak. I must have been the first person at the school that she had ever spoken to. I was about to make some kind of remark about her finally talking, but I thought I better not as I didn't want to offend her. Yeah, me too. Soccer is the only sport where I really feel like I know what's going on, I replied. It took me a few too many seconds before I thought of something else to say. You seem to really like drawing, I remarked. She blushed a little when I said that. My mom taught me how to draw. Was your mom an artist? I asked. I think so, she replied. I didn't know her very well. She passed away a long time ago. I'm sorry. My mom also died a while back. She seemed to open up a lot more after I said that. Eventually, she told me about how she had been living alone with her father for most of her life. She kept telling me that he was a mean man, and he would often punish her for the smallest of mistakes. She mentioned that her dad once forcefully held her hand in boiling water because she knocked over a bowl of soup by accident. He also blamed her for every time he had a bad day at work. After hearing this, I started to feel sick. I couldn't believe what she was telling me. She was such a sweet person. She sure as hell didn't deserve to be treated like trash by everyone, including her own father. After about 15 minutes into our conversation, the sun broke free from behind the clouds, and Ali started to take off her jacket. When she did this, I caught a glimpse of several pink ribbon scars along her forearm. I felt my heart sink after seeing this. I was uncertain as to what I should say, but I eventually just asked if she wanted to hang out after school sometime. She seemed unsure at first, but let out a slight smile and agreed. Sometime later that week, Ali came over to my house and insisted that we watch 10 Things I Hate About You together. We both had a pretty good time and she seemed really happy. I remember us playing foosball for a while, and at one point I somehow managed to hit the ball upwards and into the ceiling fan, which sent it sailing across the room like a rocket before crash landing inside my fishbowl. That was the first time I had ever heard her laugh, and I'll never forget that sound. After that, Ali and I became close friends. We would walk to school together, eat lunch together, and after school we would often go exploring in the woods behind my house. Despite her seeming really happy and full of life while she was with me, I could always tell that she was hiding something. I could sense that she was slowly falling apart underneath the mask that she wore when I was around. She never wanted to go back home after school, and sometimes she would come over to my house late at night because she was afraid of her dad. I remember us talking about how we were going to run away and never come back. She was like a sister to me, and I felt like I had to do everything that I could to protect her. I really wanted her to live the peaceful life that I knew she truly deserved, and I felt that if I didn't look after her, no one else would. As time went on though, we started to see each other less and less. Ali ended up going to a different high school than me, and I moved 20 minutes or so outside of town, so she couldn't walk to my house anymore. I started to get caught up in some unfortunate things that were going on in my life. I sort of drifted off from reality for a while. My dad and stepmom got a divorce shortly after I turned 16, and as a result, I became a bit of an alcoholic. I soon fell into a rather serious depression, and I stopped talking to many of my friends. I only saw Ali once, maybe every few months at this point. Eventually, my junior year of high school came around, and this was about the time that I started to have these really weird dreams, which I now believe have some sort of spiritual meaning. Keep in mind that I'm really not much of a religious person. This all happened over 12 years ago, but I can clearly recall almost every detail in my mind. The first dream happened one night after I'd practically drank myself to sleep. I found myself standing upside down in a nearly pitch-black forest somewhere. It was like the whole world had been flipped and gravity was somehow reversed. I looked all around and saw nothing but a dense overgrowth of intertwining branches and leaves. The place was oddly familiar, and I felt like I had been there before, although I could not quite put my finger on it. I noticed an old rope swing tied to a tree that was swaying back and forth in the breeze. It was hanging upside down and pointed towards the vacant night sky. When I saw this, it felt as though something had just punched me in the gut, like I had just been electrocuted. I then heard a loud ringing sound in my ears and began to discern a very tall figure about 10 yards ahead of me in the woods. Whatever this thing was, it must have stood roughly 40 or so feet high, as it was towering above the trees. The entity was incredibly thin, probably only a foot or two wide. It blended in perfectly with the dense foliage, and if it were not for its haunting white eyes which illuminated part of the forest canopy, it would have easily been mistaken for a tree. I was suddenly overwhelmed with an enormous feeling of sadness and heartbreak, the likes of which I've never felt before. I felt myself fall to my knees, and my vision became very blurry with tears. This tall black creature then bent down so that its face was only a few feet from mine. The only feature I could make out on this thing were its eyes, which were blindingly bright at this point. I don't remember being afraid of this thing, and I got the impression that it felt sympathy for me. Without opening its mouth, it began to speak in this soft, calm voice. It said, "I'm here, you're not." My chest began to sting as it spoke, and again it repeated the sentence, "I'm here, you're not." It said the same thing 5 or 6 more times before its eyes suddenly started to shimmer with red and blue light. The light grew brighter and brighter until all I could see were the colors red and blue. And then I woke up. Only a couple of seconds after I awoke, I was immediately startled by my alarm going off, which was set for 7:30 a.m. I reached over and turned off my alarm, and then sat up in my bed, confused, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What was that supposed to mean? I thought to myself. I realized that the horrible feeling of grief that I had just felt moments ago was now nowhere to be found, yet I remembered it very clearly. It just felt like a normal dream. The feeling was gone, and I wasn't really all that shaken up by the whole thing. Still, something didn't feel quite normal about that dream. Puzzled, I got up out of bed and carried on with my day. About 2 weeks had passed after that, and the dream I had earlier was hardly ever on my mind anymore. I fell asleep one night on the couch while watching a movie, and once again found myself in the same dream world as before. Although this time there was something different. The forest was burning bright with fire, and I could feel the heat coming from all around me. I looked around me to see if I could find that creature again, and sure enough there it was, standing high above the treetops. I was immediately overwhelmed with that same painful sense of sadness that I had felt in my previous dream. This time I collapsed completely onto the wet ground beneath me. The dark figure then knelt down beside me and came very close to my face when it spoke in that same calm voice. However, this time it sounded a little more urgent than before. It spoke to me softly, quickly chanting the following phrase as if it did not have much time. "Find me here, I'll be sleeping." It rapidly said the same thing several times before its eyes began to flash red and blue once again. I woke up in the same fashion as the first dream, and shortly afterwards I could hear my alarm go off in the other room. This seemed strange to me because that meant that I had woken up at the exact same time as my last dream. The thought of this frightened me a little bit, but I still wasn't sure what the message I heard in my dream meant, if anything. I realized that this second dream was a lot shorter than the first one, like it had been sped up or something. As I did before, I continued on with my day, but this time I wasn't about to let the dreams go. I knew that there was something strange happening to me, and it wasn't just a dream like any other. I thought that there was surely going to be another dream like this sometime soon, so I patiently waited for my next experience. 2 months went by, and by now I was willing to let go of the bizarre dreams and forget that they ever happened. I was exhausted after a long and particularly awful day at school, and I fell asleep as soon as I got home. That's when I had the third dream, and this one was not like the others. This felt very real. I was already lying on the ground and crying when this dream began, and the creature spent no time bending over towards me as it was already knelt down beside me. It was as if this creature didn't want to waste any time and was abandoning the beginning of the dream. One other thing I noticed was that I was no longer hot from the surrounding fire. Instead, I was shivering from a biting cold, and the forest was covered in about a foot of snow. Without delaying, the eyes started to flash red and blue again as the creature spoke, only saying the phrase once this time. "Why did you wait? You'll know when you feel it." I felt an electric shock race throughout my body before I was jolted awake. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew something was very wrong. I could sense that something bad was about to happen, and I didn't know how, but it felt like someone was watching my every move. Not in a creepy way, but more like whatever was watching me knew what was about to happen next, as if they had already seen it before. It didn't feel threatening to me. It felt sort of sad, like it felt deep empathy for me and wanted to comfort me, but didn't know how. It's hard to explain what I was feeling. It just all felt so clear in that moment. I was absolutely certain that something terrible was going to happen, but any attempt I might make to stop it from happening was hopeless. My shaking hand instinctively reached over to grab my phone for some sort of quick comfort. I noticed that it was 7:30 p.m. I then saw that I had 11 missed calls, so I checked my call history fearing the worst. I got a nauseating feeling in my stomach. It was Ali. She had called me 11 times whilst I was asleep. I didn't even bother to call her back. Instead, I threw off my covers and hurried downstairs and into the garage. I quickly hopped on my bike and headed out into the night. I remember praying desperately to God that everything would be okay as I rode towards Ali's house. The whole way there, I continued to feel as though someone was watching over me, pushing me to ride faster through the pouring rain and the dense fog. Finally, after an exhausting 2 hours of riding my bike, I entered my friend's neighborhood. As I was rounding the corner nearest to her house, I began to see the reflections of red and blue lights shimmering off the wet ground. I felt all of the life drain from my body as I caught my first glimpse of the house. Men in yellow reflective suits rushed through the old iron gate, breaking down the door whilst calling out Ali's name. My gaze then shifted towards Ali's father, who was yelling out profanities while being held down over the hood of a police car. A wave of heat swept over me as I approached. The house was entirely engulfed in fire, and I stared helplessly at the flames as they rose high into the cool night air. I suddenly lost all my strength, and my legs gave way beneath me. The realization that all this was really happening was slowly setting in. I felt the tears streaming down my face, and that's when I collapsed onto the ground. Eventually, one of the paramedics saw me laying there and came over to see what was wrong. I asked him if my friend was in there, but the man just shook his head and told me that he was sorry. I slowly handed the man my phone, and he called my stepmom for me. I think I sat there, broken-hearted, for at least an hour and a half, just watching the house as it burned to the ground, knowing that my friend was probably in there. My stepmother later came rushing up from behind before hugging me tightly. I tried to hold back my tears in front of my stepmom, but to no avail. She knew how much Ali had meant to me at one time, and she kept telling me how much she loved me. She continued to embrace me for a while longer before we finally headed back home. That night, I laid in bed staring at the ceiling until the sun came up. I managed to get some sleep around 8:30 a.m, but when I awoke, I knew that whatever was watching over me was gone. The feeling I had the night before had completely left without a trace. I remember feeling very alone. It didn't take long for the news of what really happened to get around town. Ali had done something to upset her dad. Something minor and insignificant, I imagined. Yet he, in all his stupidity and drunken rage, decided to lock Ali in her room. Meanwhile, he went back downstairs and began tearing the place up, a common tradition with Ali's dad. He started throwing chairs against the walls, smashing bottles, and even knocked over a large fake tree in the living room, which ignited the moment it made contact with the fireplace. Long story short, her father claims that he was not able to rescue Ali and still have enough time to escape from the house himself. They think that Ali had taken a bunch of pills to force herself to fall asleep, afraid to later confront her dad, meaning that she was likely unconscious during the fire. I don't know what became of her father. All I know is that he was arrested and no one ever saw him again. The only thing that mattered to me was that I had just lost my only true friend, forever. I truly cannot describe how horrible the feeling was once I learned what happened to Ali. I wanted to mourn for my friend right then and there, but somehow I had forgotten altogether how to cry. My mind just became detached from it all, and besides, life wasn't about to grant me a moment of mourning just yet. No, my friend's death was soon followed by the death of my cousin, whom I was very close with. He had taken his own life after a painful 11-year battle with bipolar disorder and depression. My stepmom also passed away from cancer the following year. It was just one of those times where everything feels so surreal that your mind keeps trying to convince you that it was all a dream. Such an awful feeling, one which is much worse than any fear or pain that I've ever experienced. I didn't feel like I could bear it forever, and at that point I truly did not want to live anymore. Eventually, I started having these dreams, after my stepmother had passed, of a dark hole. I couldn't see anything, but I could tell that I was falling. I was afraid to stop myself, yet the longer I fell, the more scared I became. I couldn't take it anymore. I really wanted to die. But there was that feeling again. Someone was watching over me, but this time it didn't feel sad. It was as if it was letting me know that I was safe. I would then suddenly feel myself laying down, with sunlight beaming down on my face, although I still could not see anything. I would always wake up shortly after this, alone in my room once again. The world didn't stop to wait for me while I was falling to pieces. Everyone was moving on without me, but I learned to enjoy the feeling of being left behind, because it was a strangely comforting feeling that made it easier to fade away from reality. However, I didn't fade away like everyone else did at the time. I probably would have though, and I would likely not be here today if I was left alone much longer. But something happened that changed my life forever. Something that reminds me that we are never truly alone, no matter how painfully alone we may feel at times. I had one final dream, about a month before my 18th birthday, which makes me smile every time I think about it. I remember being on all fours, struggling to push back on an immense force that was trying to bury me into the ground. I was calling out for help, but no one was around to hear my trembling voice. I tried so hard and for so long to keep this force at bay, but finally I realized that I could not win this battle. I surrendered to the feeling and let myself fall onto the ground. The cold dirt began to swallow me whole, pulling me deep into the earth. I closed my eyes and sobbed softly as I breathed my last breath. I was no longer afraid, and I was ready to die. A sensation then gently washed over me, and my whole body began to tingle. Something eventually told me to open my eyes, and when I did, I was sitting on the edge of a pier, looking out at this beautiful orange sky. After a few moments, I turned to the left of me, and there she was, my sweetest friend. She smiled innocently as I looked right through her. No words were spoken. We just looked into each other's eyes and then gazed out at the sunset together. Ali used to sometimes tell me how much she wanted to go to the beach, yet she had never been, and now I was right there with her. I could hear the waves crashing against the supports underneath the pier, and I could feel the gentle breeze caress my cheek. This was by far the most beautiful moment I've ever experienced in my life. I felt a calming warmth in my chest, and I turned to tell Ali that I loved her, but before I could speak, she leaned over and wrapped her arms around me. She held me so tightly, and I started to shed tears of joy, sadness, and confusion all at the same time. Finally, she spoke softly in my ear, in her sweet, familiar voice. She told me that it was time for her to go, and then she said something that has stayed with me in my mind ever since that day. "We are always here," she said. "Close your eyes and we are there with you, always." When I opened my eyes, she was gone, and I sat there alone on the pier for a while longer, not really thinking about anything, until I awoke in my bedroom. And that was the end of it. I've never had anything strange like that happen to me since then, and I honestly don't think I ever will again. Whatever that creature was in the first 3 dreams, it was definitely not some kind of spiritual representation of my friend Ali. It was something else altogether. Maybe it was an angel of some sort. I don't think I'll ever know for sure, but it was more than just a figment of my imagination. It foreshadowed the worst year of my life, and it made predictions which later came true. I'm pretty clueless as to what its intentions were, but it didn't feel threatening in any way. This, whatever it was, had a deep connection with me. It felt sort of like a mother looking after her child. I like to believe that it was a guardian angel or something of the like, and it understood exactly what I was going through. As I said before, I am not a religious person. However, my gut feeling told me that whatever that being was is far beyond our human understanding. I believe that it came from whatever plane of existence is patiently waiting for us after this life. I have since moved to California, where I sometimes drive to the beach and head to the pier around sunset. It makes me feel closer to not only Ali, but also to all the others that I've lost over the years. When you lose someone who you truly love with all your heart, it forms a wound that can never truly heal. Sure, we all have to get on with our lives at some point, and memories of our loved ones inevitably begin to fade over time. But when you care about someone deeply, you form a powerful connection with that person, one that we often don't notice until they're gone. I know in my heart of hearts that this truly indescribable feeling is simply too strong to break, and not even death can silence the bond I have with those I've lost. We all have that one memory that burns, yet we can't seem to let go of it. This is mine, and it saved my life. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe for more of the paranormal. And if you have not done so already, please click the bell to ensure that you receive notifications for new videos. Remember, the more you know, the more there is to fear.